Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Stephanie Swinier. I'm the Director of our Demand Center for Human Capital Management at Workday. I'm pleased to introduce the speakers. We're also pleased to co-host today's event with our valued partner, Accenture, and excited to have thought leaders from both Accenture and Forrester to share their latest research outlining the HR business trends and technology landscape. First, Kraig Eaton is the Managing Director of Accenture Strategy, Talent, and Organization. He's responsible for leading the Accenture Human Resources Consulting practice for the Americas. Kraig advises leading firms like yours on how to build high-performance businesses that drive optimization and growth through human resources. Kraig will discuss Accenture's The Future of HR research designed to examine the new mission, mandate, skills, capabilities, roles, and organizational structures that will emerge for the HR function in the future, and also how digital is largely shaping that future. Also joining us today, you will hear from industry analyst Paul Hamerman of Forrester Research. Paul is the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. As an analyst on the Applications Development and Delivery team at Forrester, Paul focuses on human resources management and financial applications, as well as the trends and directions in the overall market for enterprise applications. Paul has been an industry analyst for over 15 years and has 33 years of overall experience in research and advisory services, management consulting, and systems integration, authoring such reports as the Forrester HRMS Wave and recently Transforming the Job Candidate Experience from the Outside In. Paul will share the types of digital technology disrupting HR to create the most engaging experiences in our businesses today. A reminder to submit your questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A panel, and we also encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter at hashtag WDAY. But for now, we invite you to sit back, relax, as our industry thought leaders share their vision of what you should be considering to delight your workforce. Kraig?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And a big thank you to Workday and to Paul Hamerman from Forrester for the partnership and giving us, Accenture, the opportunity to partner with two great organizations. So as Stephanie mentioned, my name is Kraig Eaton, and I am responsible within Accenture for our HR strategy practice across the Americas. And boy, what a great time to be focused in on the HR space. And judging by the number of participants that we have in the session today, that to me is a strong indication around the interest and the large degree of transformation and innovation that's coming out of the function and how exciting it is to be associated with the function. So as Stephanie mentioned, what I wanted to do as part of my agenda topic today is just share a bit about some recent research that Accenture has authored and really anchor it on this concept of how the new workforce, the workforce generations, the trends that are starting to influence how HR needs to service their quote-unquote customer base, and how technology is playing a significant role within that capability. So if I'll move on and again, please feel free as we go into the Q&A session to be very vocal and ask as many questions as possible. So on slide 4, this is a bit of an overview on the outcome from the very first phase of our research. And let me take a bit of a mini step back here and just set some of the context around the research that we've conducted. It's a 3-year research study with the intention of trying to define and set some innovative thinking around where this function is going, how HR organizations need to be redesigned and or the new structures that they need to operate under, and also the future role of the HR leader and how those elements are being dictated by significant market drivers and workforce drivers. And so what you're seeing on slide 4 is really the output of the first phase of that research. And it was the identification of 10 key trends through conversations with business leaders, with HR practitioners, with HR experts from the consulting field and folks within the analyst community like Paul, really trying to get a grasp on, where is this function going? How does it need to evolve as the markets evolve, as the industry evolves, and as the workforce evolves? What we'll focus in on today as part of our agenda are really 4 of the 10 trends. And the first one really fits into this macro trend that we call HR in the digital age. So many of you, I'm sure, are experiencing this in one capacity or another with respect to how aspects of cloud technology, how social media is starting to change the nature of how we service our candidates, our existing workforce, our extended workforce, whether that be the contingent workforce, and really how we interact with our alumni population. And whether that be the emergence of new user interfaces around how to create a better interaction and a better feel for how our workforces interact with the HR technology, whether that be taking some of the principles of social media, which I sort of look at through a bit of a fragmented or just-in-time nature, how we bring some of that into the HR arena. As you can see in the second trend, this concept of social driving what we call the democratization of work, which really means through the emergence of data at your fingertips, through better interaction with your HR technologies, with better collaboration tools, we can put much of that power back in the hands of the business leaders and of the supervisors to really drive a lot of the talent-related decisions. The second set of trends that we'll focus in pretty heavily on today is this concept of the evolution of talent and evolution of work. And so the way that we've been thinking about this at Accenture is it's really a 3-pronged approach. The first is just the nature of how work is being done out in specific industries are shifting. And I'll use an example that's near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of time with organizations within the financial services industry, specifically in the banking arena. And for those of you who have had any interaction within the last couple weeks or months or quarters with your bank, you'll know that as you walk into a retail branch, the branch is fundamentally different. They are embedding digital into the interaction model within that traditional brick-and-mortar branch. And whether that be through ATMs that have video conferencing capabilities, whether that be the upskilling or reskilling of the branch sales force to be much more of an advisor rather than a product specialist, because I think the expectation is that through web channels or online channels that the customers are becoming much more savvy and educated before they walk into a branch. And so you see a fundamental shift in how work is done. And based upon that shift in how work is done, that is evolving to a transition in the workforce. A couple of them that I just mentioned, in particular within banking, the role of the branch manager. Within the retail space, the role of the sales force within the within the store environment. And fundamentally, from an HR perspective, what that drives is sort of the third leg of the stool, which is how HR needs to now shift in order to deliver a more robust and more effective experience in finding that new set of skills and expertise within that evolving workforce. So we're really seeing are two aspects of that. One is, how does HR create a better and more seamless employee experience? Whether that be breaking down some of the traditional barriers of what HR does, whether that be putting some of the power of the HR activities back into the fingertips of the managers, as I mentioned before, and really having managers continue to own some of the people portfolio. or as the last trend outlines, starting to take more of what we call a segmented or segmentation approach to your workforce. Marketing has really done a fantastic job of being out in the front of segmenting your customer population and bringing different principles, whether it be product definition or whether it be how you sell those products based upon each of your customer segments. Well, HR needs to do the exact same thing with their customer segment, which is your employees. And really, how do you take that customer persona mentality and really think about if I've got a younger generation within my workforce, or I've got an aging generation, or I've got a specific population that's going through hyper growth, how do I as an HR practitioner create a differentiated experience for each one of those customer segments? So just a very quick surf through these 10 trends, and as a bit of a commercial, you can go out onto Accenture.com. You'll see material. If you search on future of HR, you'll see more in-depth information around each one of these trends and white papers for many of them that go a bit deeper into what these trends are, some examples of where we're seeing innovation across different industries, and a little bit more around the impact to the HR organization specifically. So if I go on to the next slide, I've hit on a little of these, but what I really wanted to do is anchor the transformation of this function on what we see as 4 key market drivers. And what to me is very striking is those of you who have gone through HR transformations or some evolution of the function in the past, it has been very heavily dominated or driven by traditionally 1 or 2 things. One is some sort of a cost-cutting exercise to try and really lean out or drive efficiency into the function. Or secondly, one that is very heavily business-led, whether that be where you're going into a hyper-growth mode within a specific emerging market, or whether there is a significant disruption within the industry that you play in, and the need is, as we articulated in the previous slide, for HR to really think about their workforce differently. What's unique about this transformation, at least in my mind, is there is a dynamic that is driving a lot of this change that actually is driven by the workforce themselves and how they want to be serviced, and their interaction that they would like to have with HR in servicing their needs as either a candidate, as an employee, as a manager, or as an exiting employee. And so we look across 4 different dimensions here. The first one is this focusing on consumerization. And it very much goes in line with the conversation I was mentioning before around how marketing is really driving a very heavy customer segmentation approach. Well, the same goes true for your employee population, and this concept of the customization of everything, right? How work is done, the devices in which I want to utilize in order to interact with HR or conduct HR business. The creation of a differentiated employee experience or brand. A lot of organizations will ask us, how do I create a more effective and robust recruiting function or recruiting processes? And the first thing that I often talk to our clients about is, well, how are you creating a differentiated employee brand? That's really what's going to drive individuals to want to work for your organization, is this concept of a differentiated brand. And you may have to think about having more than one brand based upon the different segments of your workforce. And then the last one in this group is this concept of consumer-based expectations in the workforce. And what I would say is that's a nice segment into the second topic, which is there is starting to become a blurring of the lines between how people interact with technology or interact with services in their personal life, and how that needs to come in and how that's driving expectations around how they interact with their employer. So technology is a big influencer of that, and so the mobile devices, the social media, and being able to really get down to if I am if I am there's a significant life event within my life that's occurring, whether I'm making a move. There are things in terms of looking at real estate and all those activities, or shifting some of my personal services, and then easily transitioning through a combination of a work-life portal and an employee portal right into those life event activities that I need to do as part of my employment agreement. New forms of collaboration, right? Again, that portal example is a perfect one, where it really is blurring the lines and starting to shift everything to much more of a life event-driven trigger. And then, digital technologies enabling remote and asynchronous work. That's a nice trigger right into the third topic, which is this concept of anytime, anywhere, any place, which is what we oftentimes refer to as start anywhere, finish anywhere. And a good example I use of that is if somebody is thinking about a leave of absence, oftentimes they'll initiate their research on a mobile device or a tablet on their way to work. As they get into work, they may then pick that research back up through their workstation and/or by calling a contact center and continuing to get educated. And they may need to finish that off when they get back home and talk to their significant other, and really get down into, do I want to take a short-term leave of absence? Do I want to take on some other leave of absence? How do I use all these different channels and devices to really get to that final step? And then the last piece I'll just hit on is this concept of the changing nature of the workforce. We've done a lot of research around both the millennials and post-millennials, as well as the baby boomers, and what do they expect from their relationship with their employer. And two things have really started to come to the forefront. One is there is more of a focus on doing the work that they enjoy, more project-based, skill-based than the legacy experience, which is I want to be long-tenured and build a long-lasting relationship with my employer. And so what that's doing is it's really driving a phenomenon around an increase of the extended workforce concept, and the increase of your workforce actually not being full-time employees of your company. Things like job auctions are starting to emerge, where folks can go out and bid on smaller pieces of work. We see in the baby boomer population where they're starting to exit the organization that they are becoming a good source of contract labor. They're a known commodity. They are a proven resource. They understand your culture. How can you extend that value that they provide, but think outside of the traditional barriers of the employment contract? So a little bit about the market forces that we see driving it. So as we bring all this back together, and as I present this oftentimes to a lot of HR practitioners and HR leaders, the question that oftentimes follows is, I get all that, right? We're feeling it, we're experiencing a lot of that, but what do I do about it, right? How do I adopt my HR structure, my practices, my policies, my technologies to really best support all of these trends that we've just talked through? And there's really three components that we see. One is rethinking in essence, your service delivery model, your channel strategy in terms of how you interact. And that is not just from a technology standpoint, but it is rethinking your tiering strategy in terms of if people call in, does that go right into your tier 1 contact center, and are people really starting to expect more from their interaction and expect a higher degree of expertise when somebody picks up the phone on the other end? Whether that be web chat capabilities, whether it be using the social collaboration concepts and giving them more easy access to expertise within the organization, or even within a peer-to-peer conversation, so that before they reach out to you as an HR expert, that they can have a conversation with a peer who maybe has gone through the exact same experience that they're about to go through. The second one is of course, to go back and take a fresh look at your policies and your processes, and make sure that they are focused equally on the employee experience and the efficiency factor. All too often, folks have spent too much time on, how do I lean out my processes? How do I automate for the sake of automating? And oftentimes what is sacrificed is, what is the experience that employee or quote-unquote customer of HR is really having? From a service delivery concept, I mentioned this term that we coined as shattering the boundaries. So what we're starting to see is this shift, which I've got a slide on in a second, around moving away from a concept of HR services. HR needs to do these set of activities upon an onboarding, within the onboarding process. HR's role within the exit activity are these 5 or 7 steps. And really starting to think about how do we shatter the boundaries and actually think about it more through the concept of employee services. If I'm a newly hired individual and I come onto your organization, in addition to doing all of my HR activities, I'm also going to get a provisioning of my laptop. I'm going to get workspace assigned. I'm going to get a corporate card and business cards. I'm going to get a mentor assigned. HR, we are starting to see a phenomenon where HR takes a much more active role in shepherding the employee through that process, and even pushing some of that back into the hands of the business. And then, as I mentioned, this concept of taking cues from marketing and finding the right balance between standardization and segmentation. And what that does not mean, which is what we often saw 10 years ago, which is taking everybody above grade 54, every executive, and saying they're going to get white glove service. No, it's more of a phenomenon that says, let me create my employee segments, and let me define moments that matter within those segments, and those are where we may want to give the employee different channels to interact with and potentially a higher touch level of service. For example, if you've got an organization within a certain line of business that needs to be more agile because you're going through hyper-growth, that is where we're starting to see a higher touch recruiting model. So that is an example of where you can create a differentiated service delivery structure. And then lastly, on the measurement side, is how do we bring all that together using things like human capital analytics to not just measure the traditional cost to serve, but really measure the customer satisfaction. Measure how the new ways of structuring HR, the new tools and techniques, the new technologies, how is that really driving up employee sentiment? How is that actually contributing to increased productivity? And in the old days, those were the soft benefits that in every business case people said, take it out, it's too hard to quantify. Well, with human capital analytics today, we are finally seeing that you can quantify the hardline impact between an effectively transformed learning organization and speed to proficiency. So slide 7 really gets into those 3 levers as people say, well, where do I go from here? What should I do to start to transform my HR function? And there's 3 components that help shift the paradigm from this concept of HR, very siloed HR services, to one that's more employee-centric. And the first one is this concept of segmentation, both across services and channels, as I mentioned, and there's really 2 exercises you need to execute in there. One is identify your employee personas and your different employee segments. And the second one is, and then within each of those segments, inventory, what are the key HR interactions or moments that matter that may warrant a differentiated level or channel of service. The second one is creating an integrated architecture. Many of you in the past may have gone down the path of what many called cross-functional shared services or integrated business services. Well, this is a much different concept. What this is doing is really looking at it less from a how do we drive economies of scale and therefore reduce cost. This is how do we look at how we can service the employee and break down some of those corporate function silos that exist across the back office, or better bring in the business into those cross-functional processes. Sometimes people refer to that as looking across the entire value chain. The example I mentioned before, which I'll talk about in the next slide, this onboarding concept is a perfect example of how an integrated architecture can span across those corporate function silos and deliver a better employee experience. And then the third one is really looking at an outcome-based measurement. And so, in the past, SLAs were very functionally specific. HR has SLAs for them completing their specific activities. IT has their SLAs. The problem is nobody put those together and said, how are we delivering the best possible experience around mobility or leaves of absence, and not creating measurements and metrics within each of our silos, but really looking at it across the balanced scorecard and how we can look at the customer experience, how we can look at how we reduce the risk profile of the organization, right? How did we actually deliver on revenue generation at the macro level, not just within each of our silos? And slide 8 really hits on the example I mentioned and brings it home around this. This one specifically is around the onboarding experience and how this would work within a employee services concept. And the channel that we've called out here are really twofold. One is the emergence of a personal advocate, which is a role that many organizations are taking on to help break down the barriers across those corporate functions, as well as better utilizing technology, something like an onboarding portal or a separations portal where it aggregates all the key activities and tasks that an employee, as they're joining the organization or exiting the organization, need to do, regardless of who, quote unquote, owns that task from a corporate function standpoint. And then slide 9, as I mentioned, the second part of our research study after we identified those key top 10 trends. We've now spent a lot of time and just recently published our new thinking around the emerging operating models and how HR can rethink their structure to better align to these new service delivery concepts. And so we have developed thinking around seven emerging models, each of them anchored to a specific business driver, which is the axis to the left there. Organizations that are relatively stable and are just looking to drive out additional efficiency and optimization of the function. Are continuing to use that top left, the business partner COE model. That's what oftentimes is coined the Ulrich model. And what we're starting to see there is really more consolidation of the centers of expertise. We're looking at, we see more consolidation of the HR business partner population and creating more agility and nimbleness within the function. And then those that are trying to drive more customer intimacy within their HR experience, the one that I would call out there is the talent segment model that heavily relies on this concept that I alluded to numerous times around segmenting your workforce, not just through the traditional channels of geography or business, but more thinking about it, some non-traditional avenues like generation, like life events, and where people may be within their stages of life and what they want out of their employer. And so, very quick overview, but again, as a bit of a commercial, I would encourage you to go onto Accenture.com. There is a white paper that we published that goes into much more detail around each one of these emerging models. Okay. So with that said, I know that was a very quick surf through, but I want to hand it off to Paul Hamerman, and I want to thank everybody for the time, and I look forward to Q&A on the back end. So, Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Kraig, and thanks to Workday and Accenture for the opportunity to be with you on this webcast, and thanks to all of you for attending. At Forrester, we have a new tagline. It's called Challenge Thinking, Lead Change, and what I want to share with you today are some ideas about disrupting some of the sort of tired and traditional paradigms in HR so that HR can deliver more value to the business. So in terms of the format of my presentation, I'm going to just, very simple, a few sections I want to present to you. I'm going to start out talking about some of the key business trends that we see playing out in HR processes. And these are really next practices that you should be thinking about as you adopt newer and better technologies. Then I'm going to review some of the trends in the technology itself that's changing how HR systems are deployed and the experiences within those systems. And then I'll wrap up with some technology strategy recommendations. So clients often ask me, what are other companies doing to improve their employee experiences and so forth? And I ask them, well, what are the outcomes that you want to achieve? And maybe it's time for you not to look at what other companies are doing, but really to step up and lead change in your own organization. So I see 4 opportunities. Well, there's at least 4 opportunities. Before that, I want to share with you in some business processes that sort of exemplify what I mean by next practices. The first one is about candidate experience to drive better talent acquisition. The second one is about continuous performance. It's really around disrupting the traditional process that companies use to measure employee performance. The third one is about digital engagement and really, raising the bar in the employee experience and creating better levels of employee engagement digitally. And the last one is really changing how employees acquire knowledge, moving from a traditional learning to what we call informal learning. So I authored a paper recently that talks about making the candidate experience outside in. And we draw some parallels from the customer world. Forrester does a lot of research in customer experience and the customer life cycle. So in this report, I had adapted the customer life cycle and changed it up a bit to create what I call the candidate life cycle. And so this is really about rebuilding the candidate experience with a philosophy that makes candidates successful instead of creating a process or a gauntlet to try to make it difficult for candidates to get a job at your organization, which is really the reality of what a lot of recruitment activity is today. So it kind of reminds me of this classic video game I used to play with my kids called Crash Bandicoot, where you navigate this progressive obstacle course and you keep, falling off and having to go back to the beginning. And that's really what it's like for a job seeker nowadays. But fortunately, there is a movement to reinvent candidate experience and really create a talent brand and attract the best talent to your organization. So if we look at this life cycle approach, I broke it down into a six-phase approach, and this approach I think can help you not only drive a better candidate experience, but also think about the fact that you do tend to eliminate the vast majority of your candidates, but you want to create an experience in which they'll still want to do business with you, and so this actually can drive revenue. So when we look at these 6 phases in the life cycle, it starts with the discover phase, where a candidate learns about potential opportunities from a wide variety of sources. So you cast a net through candidate relationship marketing. You use job aggregation sites, social networks, personal referrals, and a whole variety of techniques to drive candidate interest to your company. Then it moves into the next phase, which is the explore phase, and this is where the candidate really learns about the opportunities and the culture of your organization. And then it moves into the apply phase, where you want the candidate to join a community. You want them to become part of a talent community that's not just job opening specific, but really about creating a pool of talent for your organization. It moves into the next phase, which is the prove phase, where it's really up to your organization to prove to top talent that you're the best place to work. And then it moves into the join phase, which is the onboarding experience that Kraig talked a little bit about, and finally into the advanced phase, which is the employee life cycle itself. So we arrayed some best practices around this life cycle approach, and there's a variety of things that can be done to raise the level of experience for candidates. There's also a lot of really interesting technology you can put into this into this life cycle. And just to highlight a few, there's some tools available for social marketing, candidate relationship management that creates outreach to candidates that may not be actively seeking jobs at the moment. And really, some of your best talent will be passive job seekers. It also looks into creating an employment brand. And so the employment brand is really different than your company or product brand in that you're really trying to establish a reputation in the marketplace as a great place to work and a place where really the top talent in your industry wants to come work. You get into other things about networking during the candidate process, enabling candidates to network with employees in real time and really understand their work culture. It gets into creating a mobile experience because a lot of millennials nowadays the mobile phone is the computer, and you want to create an entire experience that's mobile. You want to build talent pools for continuous recruitment. You want to provide a process with a high level of transparency, so they're not they're not in the dark about where they stand in the process. And finally, you want to create an onboarding experience. And it's not just the first day on the job, but it could be the first few months, 6 months, a year, even as the candidate really ramps up to full productivity and really becomes part of the organization's culture. So let me move to the next opportunity for innovation. And this is one that really, I think, is the subject of a lot of conversation. As Kraig and I have gone out and done a couple of live events, there seems to be a tremendous amount of interest in reinventing the employee performance process. And so we call this, the next generation of performance, continuous performance, because we need to move from this periodic appraisal process to a process that's much more engaging and forward-looking and continuous. So there are a number of problems with the process today. First of all, it's tied to an annual compensation review. But if you look at the inflation rates over the past 5 years in the range of 2 to 3%, they're at historically low levels, and so why go through all this process just to decide whether one employee gets 2% and another gets the 3% pay raise? I mean, it's not even worth it. The second thing is that traditionally the candidate traditionally the performance process has been based on skills measurement. And really, it's a leap of faith to assume that a certain level of skills is going to get you the right kind of business outcomes. I mean, think about, I went to a baseball game last night. Think about, having a pitcher that's 6'8" and has a 98-mile-an-hour fastball. I mean, that might look good on paper, that set of skills, but you're looking for a business outcome, and the business outcome is that the pitcher has to get batters out. And so that's really the focus of the manager and the front office of the ball club is they want players that can produce outcomes that benefit the team and win ball games. So so we need to really look at a performance process that's based on measuring outcomes and directing the employees, aligning them with what matters to the organization. And there are a few other, actually a number of other issues and so forth in performance. I won't go into too much more detail on that, but I do want to provide you with some guidance on what I think are 5 key principles of next generation performance management. And so, and there are a number of different ways to do this. I mean, companies can really create their own performance process that really underscores what the business is trying to achieve. So in thinking about next generation performance, we want to create a process which is continuous, in that we have continuous feedback to drive productivity and results. We need to have a process that's aligned with the specific goals and measures that drive business performance and customer success. We need to create a process that's much more engaging. And it needs to be engaging to the extent that it motivates employees rather than having this dreaded appraisal process at the end of the year. We need to create a process that's future-oriented to the extent that it focuses on driving results and also involves continuous coaching and improvement. And then finally, we need a process that's collaborative, which means that we want to encourage employees to work together and achieve outcomes that are in the best interest of customers. So I want to move to the next topic, which is another great area for innovation, which is employee engagement. And this has been a big issue for HR leaders, and the Gallup organization has been measuring employee engagement for more than a decade, and it's kind of stuck on a 30% engagement level. And we have some research of our own that sort of confirms this. You know, we asked over 7,000 participants in a survey whether or not they're likely to stay at their current job. 57% responded positively to that. We asked them, would they recommend their company's products and services to friends or family, and only 48% answered positively to that. And then it gets worse when we ask them if they would recommend their company as a place to work to friends and family. 43%. So, you know, if you take all three of those combined, it's really only about a third of employees that are, you know, truly engaged, and that tracks pretty closely to the Gallup results. So if we look at some of the gaps in engagement, you know, we found that there are a few areas which are, I think, really, really significant between engaged employees and non-engaged employees. For example, you know, if you provide them support in finding better ways to do their job, then that tends to dramatically increase the level of engagement. If you recognize and reward them for not only the efforts but the outcomes that they achieve, that's very engaging. You also need to challenge them in the work that they do. And we also found there's a pretty strong correlation between employee engagement and those that work with customers and help create positive customer outcomes on a day-to-day basis. Now, if we look at some of the best practices, I mean, there's the books written on this. I mean, there's tons of best practices. I want to just cover a few that I think are significantly aided by technology, and one of them is surveys and measures. You know, we really need to embed tools in our HR systems that help us understand and measure levels of employee engagement, so that we can act on programs that increase those levels of engagement. We need to embed more tools for rewards and recognitions in our HR portfolios. I think HR systems today are pretty good at providing career advancement tools and learning and development tools, but those are also very important parts of the HR technology portfolio. We need to be able to support flexible work schedules. We need to be able to connect employees with their programs for health and wellness and time off, which are very cherished and valued programs. And finally, we need to create digital experiences using the kinds of consumerized technologies that employees use every day in their lives, which are digital and social and mobile experiences. The final innovation area I want to cover is learning. And here on this slide, we show a contrast between the formal learning program on the right, which is very structured and instructor-led, and it drives some long-term use cases in terms of, say, compliance and managerial skills. But it's very, very rigid and structured. And the way a lot of employees are learning today is what we call informal learning, where it's really driven by the learner. And it's for immediate use in the context of trying to get work done and complete a task. And it's really the way that people naturally acquire knowledge in the digital age, using tools like Google and like YouTube to really understand things on a just-in-time basis. So let me move to the next section. I want to cover a little bit around some of the key technology drivers that are driving HR application strategy. So we have it's kind of a new signature graphic for us at Forrester that we've been using in some of our events, and we see the traditional system of record, which would be your HR payroll system of record. We see it evolving in a number of different directions. And I think one of the key areas is to create a system of engagement where you're able to touch employees every day by creating a number of engaging capabilities on top of the system of record. I think another very important piece is a system of insight. We need to embed analytics in these HR systems and be able to deliver those analytics in real time to employees, and also create predictive analytics that help us anticipate outcomes. And the final piece is automation. A system of automation is actually connecting systems to the physical world, which has, I think, more applicability to operations rather than HR at this point, but I think it's something that will evolve. So if we look at some of the top HR trends, there are a number of them. I think one that I want to talk about a little bit on the next couple of slides is software as a service. So let me hold that one for a second here. Two things that really impact the user experience are mobile and some of the user experience design techniques that we see in the new HR systems. And really mobility, well, first when mobile applications came out, there were little snippets of functionality that you could access on your device. But now what's happened is that HR technology vendors have rewritten the entire application to be accessible on a mobile device, and really using the simplicity of mobile to create a better user experience, a touch-based user experience that really gets away from a lot of the complexity. So when you look at HR systems today versus the ones that you used in the past decade, you can see a vastly different user experience, and that user experience is tends to be better in the systems that have been developed natively for the cloud. Planning and analytics is another major opportunity for improvement. I do have another slide on that I'll get into in a minute. And the final two pieces are integration. Integration is the glue which holds all the application together, and it's not the sexiest technology, but one I think is very, very important in terms of being able to propagate your HR and employee data across various systems that are used within the organization. And finally, social collaboration, which enables employees to interact more frequently, both within the organization and also with external parties. So let me move to a slide about software as a service, and I've done quite a bit of analysis of adoption trends related to software as a service, which is now the predominant model for most types of HR applications. I mean, it's virtually ubiquitous in recruiting systems, in talent management systems, and learning systems, and it's getting more and more of a foothold in the core HR and payroll systems. So we looked at the factors that are driving SaaS adoption, and it really is not so much about cost anymore, but really it's about agility and speed. By agility, I mean we're improving the flexibility of the business to configure the system as their requirements change. And secondly, it speeds the implementation and deployment of these systems. And the third factor, which shows up in here, is the ability to access new functionality more quickly, which is really the updating model. So when you think about traditional HR systems that are deployed on-premise, and you get these updates from the vendor that tend to stack up on the shelf, I mean, that's really a failed delivery model. And so what we're seeing in, I think, a big driver in the adoption of software as a service is you're now turning over the job of keeping your system up to date to the vendor, and then the vendor can provide you more and more features more quickly, like new user experiences, better analytics, and so forth, and the customers can assimilate that change much less disruptively than in the old world model. So we collected some data on SaaS adoption across a number of application areas. And so if you look at this data on HR systems, this is really comprehensive HR systems or core HR systems for organizations with more than 1,000 employees, we find that 17% had already replaced their core HR systems with SaaS systems by the end of 2014. And we're also seeing that, in 2015 and 2016, that another 19% of enterprise companies will replace their legacy core HR systems with SaaS systems. So, so really there's a tremendous amount of growth there. And I actually think that the growth is going to accelerate even faster than this survey data indicates. So let me touch on briefly workforce planning and analytics. I mean, this is some really powerful, interesting technology that's finding its way into the fabric of HR systems. So we have modeling tools, we have predictive algorithms, we have technologies like machine learning and big data that can really improve HR analytics and business outcomes. So some of the use cases that are already emerging include assessing candidate potential using some behavioral science and predictive analytics and big data. A second one is predicting the risk of attrition in the employee population. Here you see a visualization that actually comes from Workday's system, which highlights some of the employees that may be at risk to leaving the organization. So this is, I think, a pretty well proven use case at this point. And then I think another piece that's starting to gain a lot of momentum is strategic workforce planning. So not just planning for the cost of your workforce, but really looking out a few years into the future and seeing how your workforce is going to evolve and what kind of talent needs you have in which locations and so forth to help your business grow. Okay, so let me move here to a few concluding slides around HR technology strategy and recommendations. I think there are really 5 key building blocks in creating an HR technology strategy that's going to deliver some of these better business outcomes that we've been talking about. The first one is process excellence. So we want to automate all the administrative and compliance functions, but we also want to move our processes forward to innovate in the areas that really matter around performance and employee engagement, for example. A second building block is information mastery, and really this has to do with integration, it has to do with analytics, and it has to do with the security and accuracy and compliance of HR information. So it's a very, very important area that has to be addressed in your HR strategy. The third area is digital engagement. This is creating that user experience. A lot of HR systems were built in an era where the user experience was designed for HR professionals that use the system every day, but it really wasn't designed for employees. And so the modern HR system has to create an intuitive experience that touches every single employee in the organization, and using some of the modern consumerized technologies like social and mobile. The fourth building block is sustainable deployment. So you need to be able to deploy an HR system in a way that it can be kept viable in the future. And I think that software as a service is really ideally suited for that type of deployment or sustainability. And then the final piece is really shaping your people strategy and culture and being able to create better levels of engagement and reinforce the culture and value of the organization. So. Just briefly on this slide, you need to think about these building blocks in the context of putting in place a roadmap where you kind of take inventory of all your systems and processes and create a blueprint for the future, which has next generation HR systems that will be able to deliver the processes and business outcomes that you need to really make HR matter in your business strategy. And finally, I'll leave you with some recommendations and key outcomes. And so what we're talking about here is, first of all, going through an assessment process to take a real hard look at your HR processes and systems portfolio, and then align your people and talent strategy around the business and customer imperatives. Once you've done those 2 things, you can build a roadmap that will help you retire some of these obsolete on-premises HR systems and homegrown systems, and consolidate your HR solutions into a more comprehensive platform. And then finally, enable you to innovate your HR processes continuously in the future. And this will give you some outcomes like, keeping your HR systems perpetually up to date instead of having releases stack up on the shelf. It'll help you increase the flexibility for HR to manage the system and thereby reduce a lot of the current dependencies on IT professionals to keep your systems running. It'll help you implement faster and change your processes more often. It should also reduce the cost and complexity of your technical environment. And I think some business outcomes that you need to think about are the ability to engage employees and retain those employees, and finally, enable your business to be global, to be able to provide a common HR solution for your entire global enterprise. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Stephanie for Q&A.
Well, thank you so much, Kraig and Paul, for a very informative session. We're unfortunately a little short on time, but I'm going to throw out just a few questions and then we'll wrap up. So the first question was actually earlier on in the presentation, which I believe is related to Kraig's research or the Accenture research. The question comes from Susan, and she said, how do you see these trends impacting baby boomers and the more mature workforce, and that she felt like much of it was focused on millennials. Kraig?
Yeah, a couple quick comments there. One is, and some of this is, as I alluded to, the baby boomers actually really wanting to define a different relationship in terms of how they want to continue their employment with their current or future employers. And so this whole concept of part-time work for baby boomers who are exiting the organization but still want to be engaged in the workforce. So there's a lot of similarities with the baby boomer population. What I would say in general is the whole concept of the segmentation approach helps you to try and create differentiated services, differentiated channel strategies, differentiated processes and policies for those different generations and what are important to them. So some of these absolutely are applicable to millennials and post-millennials. Other concepts of more hands-on HR interaction is more applicable to more of a blue-collar workforce. Although one would challenge within a blue-collar workforce, many of them have more access to mobile devices than they do workstations, and so this anytime, anywhere concept would apply to them as well.
Great, thank you, Kraig. And I'm just kind of looking at all the questions here, and I think, what I'll do, we'll definitely field the questions back out to each of the speakers, but really what I'll do here is just ask Paul and Kraig maybe to share kind of your parting thoughts, because we're getting lots of questions about some of the new approaches that you introduced and how to put those into practice. So maybe just kind of one parting thought as to how to put these in practice.
Yeah, so I'll take a comment on that, Kraig. First of all, I think a parting thought is really think about your employee performance process. I see some questions coming in around employee performance, and there are really no hard and fast rules on what companies have to do. They really sort of have to evolve their own processes going forward that really aligns with their business strategy. And that may be more of a coaching-based approach, or could be more of a measurement type of an approach. I think companies that are focused on analytics can do a lot with creating a performance process that's very, very measurable and transparent. But the same approach doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah, and let me pile onto that a bit. My philosophy is solve what's the problem you're trying to solve, and from a performance management perspective, the problem that many people are trying to solve is just providing feedback on an annual or semi-annual basis, oftentimes very disconnected from when the performance or the issue or the success was achieved. It's starting to drive a wedge between the value that feedback is giving to people, or the value it's providing to people, which is, reward me when I do something well, coach me when I do something not well, but do it right at point in time. So this whole concept of whether you use performance ratings or not, I think you really have to really try and solve the problem, which is how do you give more just-in-time feedback? How do you more closely tie performance to development? And you're using some of these new technologies and new techniques, whether it be social, the just-in-time feedbacks, the social concepts, are really trying to solve that problem of give it to me, at point in time.
Thank you so much, Paul and Kraig. One additional item, several of you have inquired regarding the research, and so we encourage you to dive deeper into the research on the future of HR by the Accenture strategy team, and also Paul Hamerman's Forrester HRMS Wave, and help you kind of shift your experiences and then technology that can delight your workforces. And then also, we want to thank our speakers today for a very informative webinar, and we encourage you to follow them on Twitter. We've also indicated their email addresses here. Thank you so much for joining us today, and that concludes our webinar.